mercy and love. Even when the darkness may surround us, He is the Father that won't let go. Walk through the fire, His name lifted higher. Nothing can ever separate us from the love of God. Those not awakened, whose faith may be shaken, and only through Jesus is free to let it stay. Even when everything's crumbling, don't give up. Fight to hold on. We must ignore the forces that come for surrender. It's always darkest just before dawn. Even when your heart is tired and broken, we have a Redeemer who loves us, protects us as we walk through the fire. His name lifted higher. Nothing can ever separate us from the love of God. Those not awakened, whose faith may be shaken, only through Jesus is freedom eternity. Chaos, distractions, corruption, fear, rejection, and panic. The reckoning is here, benefaction.
Try that. Hopefully we're 5x5. Funny, I have zero noise in my headphones. I didn't get any music. I didn't do anything. I had to turn on one of the streams to make sure it was even going out live. Welcome. Let's build on you with Discerning Truths. Haven't been here in 5 weeks. I had a little accident where I crushed my hip and my left femur. So busted the pelvis. I've been laid up pretty good. I had pre-recorded, or I had done a stream before getting injury that was part one of my case, a Cumulative-Case-Argument for the existence of God. Because 5 weeks had gone by and I've only been back, I've joined Neo, but I haven't been on any other stream. I replayed that Monday so that there wouldn't be 5 week separation between these different presentations. And so as a review, on Monday, I looked at two propositions. They're connected. One I call Proposition X. Does the God described in the Bible exist? Okay, if I found that the God described in the Bible didn't exist, I might want to look and see if some other God exists. But if the God described in the Bible exists, I don't have to look at Allah, Buddha, Vishnu, anybody else. It's there. And then Proposition Y is connected. If Jesus actually rose from the grave, that's hard to explain. I say impossible to explain if God doesn't exist. So that would be kind of a strong argument for God existing. But if I could disprove that, that would eliminate a very strong argument. It wouldn't mean that God of the Bible doesn't exist, but it would really argue it against it. So that I'm kind of focused on Proposition Y on Friday. But on Monday, I looked at philosophical arguments for the God existing, ontological arguments, and different kinds of arguments. And I presented 4 of them because I'm trying to keep this balanced and not overweight them. I combined several arguments into one where there's multiple ontological arguments. I only presented as one combined argument to not be excessively cumulative. I also tried to assign to how convincing I thought the arguments were a lower not overstate how convincing if I found it only 52 or 55% convincing, going, oh, that's 80% convincing, and overstate it like that. So I've been trying to be very conservative. But I'll tell you, even though I studied philosophy, philosophical arguments that I have seen are not as convincing to me as some of the scientific arguments. And scientific arguments, there's a difference between science and scientism. Scientism is kind of religion, a religion based in naturalism, that naturalistic processes can explain everything, and there's nothing supernatural. There's only nature, and there's only naturalism. And science does not demand that, but scientism does. And in modern world, we've had that confusion and conflation between those. But I find that a lot of, when you actually just look at the science and not the interpretation of the science through a naturalistic worldview, that many of the scientific arguments also point for the existence of God. So one classification of these arguments is called teleological arguments. That means fine-tuning, okay? That there seems to be order, design, fine-tuning. And, you wouldn't go out in your driveway and find your car and go, wow, look at the wind blew some dirt and all this stuff in it through chance and atmospheric conditions. It put together my functioning car. So when we look at that stuff, in the cells on your wrist are so much more complicated than your car or a space shuttle or the watch you wear on your wrist. They are so far exponentially more complicated than the universe. So to look at those cells or the human body or the bodily functions and all that stuff, and to say, I don't see order or this came by chance, seems nonsensical, right? So when you see design, it implies a designer. Now you can get design without a designer. There are times that don't seem to require a designer. I mean, some people would say crystals forming like snowflakes or different things are a design without a designer. If God exists, then the designer's still there. But since there's apparently naturalistic explanations for that, the rebuttal is that there are examples of design without a designer, but in general, you're looking for it. So when we look at the fine-tuning arguments of the universe, like the gravitational constant or the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, the cosmological constants, they are so precisely done that slight deviations in them, like a 0.4% change in the strong force, nuclear force, prevents carbon formation, or the cosmological constant varying more than 1 in 10 to the 53rd. That's a 1 with 53 zeros after it, right? Would inhibit galaxy formation and make the universe lifeless. So this is highly improbable. And what statisticians say is anything with the statistics of less than 1 in 10 to the 50th, okay, is statistically so remote to be impossible. And then when you look at star formation odds and they come in 1 in 10 to the 229, that's 229 zeros, right? That happening by chance, that these fine-tuning things have to be there. So there's a scientist, has multiple degrees in various fields of science, or had. A. Wilder Smith, is gone now, but he writes for the layman a lot of times. Very good. And I recommend his books for a lot of stuff. Stephen Meyer is another person I met when I was at Biola. And his books are technical but not so technical that the regular reader can't read them. And in his book, The Signature of the Cell, specifically pages 172 to 218, he extends that teleological arguments, those design arguments, into the cell, and says just the design of the cell is just not even remotely possible without a designer. And so that's where he's making an argument. He's not starting out with God. He's starting with an intelligent design. You need an intelligent designer to get this kind of design. And then he works for it. Now, the strengths of this argument, it stems from nature's apparent purposefulness. And even critics like David Hume, who's a philosopher, acknowledge resemblances to artifacts. He acknowledged that it looks designed. He wasn't acknowledging it was designed. It aligns with empirical data, what we can observe from physics and cosmology and biology, right? And it has explanatory power for why the universe supports life, why there's any life instead of no life, right? Amid vast improbabilities that are so impractical and so absurd to be impossible, statistically impossible. And unlike cosmological arguments needing a first cause, which is their argument, right, that whatever came into existence required a cause, that's a philosophical argument. This directly infers an agency, which can be inferred from the observable fine-tuning. And it's bolstered by scholars like Robin Collins, who argues design best explains the cosmic just right kind of things. And that's in a Blackwell's Companion to Natural Theology. Okay, and that's a another good book if you want to run down this rabbit hole. Now, the claimed weaknesses is critics say the analogies between nature and artifacts are weak, as natural systems might arise to non-intentional processes like evolution. Fine-tuning probabilities are contested. Epistemic probabilities face old evidence issues, requiring priors, ignoring life existence. Physical probabilities yield zero for finite ranges, and anthropic selection reflects the observers towards life-permitting universes, making the universe's increased life odds without design, though they face issues like Boltzmann brain undermining reliability. Now, that all sounds highly technical and really brilliant, but what's happening here is they're trying to say, look, there could be conditions in all the different possibilities that came out in the universe, specific conditions, especially like if this is the planet that has life, and there and many others, that all the others failed to have the right conditions for life, but this planet did. And because there's so many planets, that those statistics are inaccurate. But critics like Elliott Sober argue likelihoods are vague without designer specifics. And in new physics, like string theory, okay, that's a hypothesis, might naturalize constants. Okay, you see these might states in that are in here. They're saying, yeah, we understand that you see design. We understand that the artifacts, what we can observe in the universe, appears designed. But there might be an explanation in nature, right? I mean, this is the strength of their argument against that. And then they come up with this multiple universe, multiverse theory. And if there's multiple universes, it would increase the odds of a naturalistic explanation, right? And so even though the odds are so remote, like 10 to the 130th power, right, that we're not even getting to down to an odds of 10 to the 50th power, which is considered statistically impossible. They're reducing it 10 to the 130th and saying that makes it more possible. No, it doesn't. You're still way beyond. You're 80 more zeros beyond statistically impossible. And critics of multiverse hypothesis, including physicists like Sabine Hossenfelder and John Horgan, argue that multiverse it violates Occam's razor. And Occam's razor is when you have multiple possible explanations for something, the simplest explanation is the one to be preferred. So if you have an explanation that a designer designed it, right? And then you invent an idea that there's just billions of universes that we haven't seen and we have no evidence for, but you invent that you're actually violating a principle in logic, And proponents counter that multiverse emerged from well-tested theories like quantum mechanics and inflation, okay? And could be indirectly tested, CMB abnormalities. That's cosmic background radiation and stuff. And ongoing missions like the James Webb Space Telescope and CMB experiments at the Simmons Observatory. Here's the problem. In quantum examinations, the particles we are observing are so small that when we're trying to observe them with light, and to give you an idea of just how difficult this is, it would be like me driving down the street in a diesel truck and hitting you walking on the street to try to determine where you were and what direction you were going. That's the comparative size between light that we're using to measure and the thing that we're measuring. So the question is, does quantum theory actually support the claims they are, or is it reaching those incorrect conclusions because our methodology for trying to even measure quantum sizes is so inaccurate? And the multiverse hypothesis are elegant solutions to deep questions, but they lack any concrete scientific evidence behind them. It has theoretical consistency, and they claim indirect inferences. But it's not there. It's a frontier for speculation. For example, physicist Hugh Everett in the 1950s suggested that every quantum measurement or event branches into multiple parallel universes, each realizing different outcomes. This is kind of like the Schrodinger cat experiment, right? The double slit thing. These are thought experiments. They are not science. They are not empirical science. They are thought experiments. You're trying to come up with an idea. And what the problem is the idea you're coming up is way more complicated and way more difficult than the explanation we have, that we have designed because there's a designer, right? So the relative value in a cumulative case argument, this is me, my subjective, right? I say this is more than 50% convincing. I think it's very strong evidence. I put it up at 70. Maybe you don't think it's that strong. Put your own numbers on this. But I think the idea of a designer as evidenced by the design in the universe and the design in our bodies and the design in all creation implies a designer. That designer is not necessarily the God of the Bible, but the God of the Bible could be that designer, right? And then the next argument, Thomas Aquinas, one of the greatest thinkers the Christian church ever produced, he came up with the fifth way of teleological proof. And he argues that non-intelligent natural bodies act towards ends. Acorns move to become an oak. The acorn doesn't have a mind in itself to become an oak. it implies a direction was given to that acorn. Something put that information in there. And you go, well, it's in the cell of the acorn. Who put the information in the cell? Right? And then like your DNA, the DNA is the information for your body, right? And all your stuff. But then God put proteins that actually read the DNA molecules and then carry out instructions. That requires language, and language conforms, right? Who created the language? Who created the conforms? Who put the information in the cell to start with? Who made a protein that was able to read a DNA? Where did that come from? That all basically talks about design. And then when you look at things like in Darwin's Black Box and by Michael Behe, and Michael Behe is not a Christian, okay? Or works by William Dubinsky, and these are from intelligent design sources. They look at things because science used to see your cell as just a blob of something, you know. We now, with microscopes and stuff, can really examine the cell. And there's a thing in the cell called a bacterial flagellum. And it looks like a little motorboat. I mean, like it's got a motor and it floats around your cell and it's there. It's just incredibly complex. And this is a small piece of the cell. And they look at it and they said, even when you try to break this down and say, well, this could have developed and that could have developed, you get to a point where it's irreducible complexity. That to have a cell be in a cell, you still end up with very complex things in that cell. And that complexity, now this is all before Aquinas, but Aquinas is thinking of this stuff, right? And his focus on teleology and nature resonates with intelligent design empirical claims, like Behe's examples, right? They provide a bridge between medieval theology and modern science, specifying a designer. They broadening the appeal, and critiques evolution gaps. Okay, when you see like Darwin's tree and the little branches of life, know that the only evidence we have is for the very tips of each branch. We have no evidence of the branches going between them. That's all fabricated. They create this stuff. Or, you know, you have, they're highlighting design-like biological information. Like Wilder Smith argues, naturalism fails to explain the directed complexity without intelligence. And I give you a place where you can get that. But I'll tell you, it's worth your time to just get a number of Wilder books and just start reading them. If you're interested in the science, because it's there. So ID, intelligent design, it's claimed as non-falsifiable because God can't be tested. You can't bring God into your scientific laboratory and ask him to reproduce creation or do anything. Well, neither can you reproduce the Big Bang. Okay? And so they're saying when you're looking at the flagellism's precursors, we don't have any of those. We don't know what there were, if there were any. And we're assuming they don't exist. And then Dubinsky specified complexity faces mathematical flaws, equivocal definitions, and ignoring evolutionary pathways, conflating improbability with impossibility. Okay? And the courts specifically refuted ID as scientific, non-scientific due to supernatural appeals. Now, I'm not going to let a judge decide for me what is scientific or non-scientific. The judge is outside his field of expertise, okay? The judge is assuming that science requires naturalism as a basis, and because ID is not naturalistic, it is therefore not scientific. That's a confusion between a worldview and a field of inquiry, right? And Aquinas' argument assumes ends are externally imposed, but evolution explains them via selection, and ID concedes grounds to evolution in non-complex areas. And this is what critics say, and I don't think any of these are true, because evolutionists admit that chance is not a cause, right? So when you're having selection, what causes the selection? And they're saying natural forces, right? Would push it on there. But how is it creating new information to make those choices? And does ID concede ground to evolution in non-complex areas? I don't think so. I think the Bible shows a lot of variety within a species. It shows no moving from species between genres and phylum and all that. Okay? So when you look at this, you go, okay, I'm looking at Aquinas' argument in light of modern science, right? And again, is this more or less convincing? And I'm only at about 50% because I see some weaknesses in Aquinas' argument. And so I don't see this leaning very strongly towards God or against God. And I'm trying not to compound on my last one, right? And if I made it above 50%, I'd be compounding on it. And if I made it below 50%, I'd be taking away from the first one. So I just made this 50% and said, okay, I'm not adding to or taking away anything from Aquinas' argument. He might have been fine when Aquinas was alive, but now in modern days we have better arguments, right? Now, scientific evidence for the universe's beginning linking to cosmological arguments. And this is the issue. You have people that are now trying to reinvent the idea that the universe had a beginning. But the Big Bang Theory, the common cause, and the common belief, and it has to do with they're looking at cosmic background radiation, they're looking at redshift in the lights, and they do that. And so people like Hawkins and Penrose, they suggested at some finite point in the past the universe came into existence. And then with further study, it was not only the universe, but time, space, matter, and energy all came into existence at the Big Bang. And all evolutionary models that build upon the Big Bang start with an explosion of nothing, no time, and nowhere, and for no cause, right? So they start with that assumption. And they go on. And people understand that that's a problem because even if you go back 14 billion years, you don't have enough time to get there. And so when you link this to other arguments, like Aquinas' second way, we just look in efficient causation, or the Kalam argument. This is something that you hear William Lane Craig talk about a lot. He really focuses on that. And that there argues that naturalism cannot explain this origin without violating causality laws. And what it means is there is no cause, no sufficient cause to explain the origin of time, space, matter, and energy in any naturalistic theory. You start talking about, they go, well, there's a flux in the quantum field. Where did the quantum field come from? What caused the flux? And how do you get cause and effects when you don't have time? Okay, if you need space for time, and space doesn't exist, how do you get a cause and effect? So that's what they're saying. You have this problem in the scientific theories, and they all tell you, don't look behind that curtain. We're going to start after the Big Bang. And yeah, the Big Bang doesn't work, so we're going to import inflation. Okay? And what inflation is, and this is Einstein said it was his biggest regret was adding inflation into his model, is he has to have the universe expanding faster than the speed of light for a fraction of a second for his math to work. So it's a cheat figure that Einstein put into his theories. And science will tell you that nothing can move faster than the speed of light. So don't look behind the curtain when we tell you the universe moves faster than the speed of light. Okay? So the strength here to this argument is the empirical data, right? Shows the universe has a beginning, right? And everything that came into existence needs a cause. That was our philosophical argument. The empirical data robustly supports a finite age, aligning with a theistic creation ex nihilo, is creation out of nothing. That out of nothing God created the universe, time, space, matter, and energy, countering eternal universe models. See, people that want to introduce eternal universe models have to go against all the available scientific data, which says the universe had a beginning. It avoids the fine-tuning probabilistic ambiguities. And that was the problem with the fine-tuning argument, is they start questioning some of your how improbable stuff is, under what situation would be there, right? And it implies a transcendental cause. Transcendental means outside of time and space. You need a cause that is sufficiently powerful, sufficiently intellectual, that exists outside of time and space to cause the universe to come in. That's the only sufficient cause you can have. And then when they come back and they go, well, quantum gravity may eliminate the need for such an initiator. Based on what? Like I said, they just throw out these things. The general relativity breaks at singularities in quantum models. And quantum cosmology suggests that pre-Big Bang states or bounces imply no absolute beginning. Again, thought experiments, no scientific evidence. Entropy, that's that everything's wearing out, winding down, going to from hot to just absolute zero, heat death, right? And it starts without fine-tuning, they say, and a steady state of cyclical universes. And this is Penrose, realizing that when he comes up with Hawking and came up with the Big Bang, he actually made a strong argument for the need for God or an intelligent designer. He goes, well, I think the universe has always existed. But you don't have evidence supporting that is the problem. And the critics argue that the beginning is model dependent, and that infinite regress or multiple multiverses. Now they'll tell you infinite regression's a philosophical absurdity. It's like, the old thing about what holds up the earth. He's on the back of an elephant. What holds up the elephant? He's standing on another elephant. This is infinite regression. But they import infinite regression into their scientific theories, and then claim that they're still being scientific. This is ridiculous, when you do it. So when I look at this and I go, how strong is this argument? Because the evidence for the universe having a beginning and needing a cause is super strong to me. I only put 65% because it doesn't necessarily prove that the God of the Bible is that cause, right? But it has a cause. And the cause that it would have to have would be an impressively powerful, impressively intellectual, intentional, right? And I would argue personal, something that lives outside that time and space. That sounds a lot like the God of the Bible. So I put it at 65. Do you think it's 60, 55? Do you think it's 80%? I find this a very strong argument. And then evidence from various fields conflicting with natural explanations for the origin of the cosmos or life. And this is where I think Wilder Smith really excels, okay, in biology. Because naturalism, remember, naturalism is part of scientism, it's not part of science, okay? It posits that undirected processes explain the cosmic and life, both the universe of the cosmos and life. But evidence challenges this. Cosmic fine-tuning, low entropy, precise conference defies chance. Abiogenesis. Now, bio is life. Genesis is the beginning. A reverses the meaning. So abiogenesis actually literally means not the beginning of life. And I consider that truth in advertising. Okay? But it's the name given to life coming about by naturalistic consequences. And I did one on abiogenesis. You can go look back through my streams. I think it's in my Start Here folder also on abiogenesis. And I go through 7 fields of science that absolutely refute this idea from abiogenesis. And I'm not using Bible scripture or anything. I'm taking scientific laws, not thought experiments, laws in science to say it's not possible. But they tell you, like once again, don't look behind the picture. It's there. And like you can read Wilder Smith or Stephen Meyer argues that the DNA's code demands intelligence. Okay? It's more complicated, than all the encyclopedias you could put together. Michael Behe is irreducible complexity, like the flagellum, right? Resists gradualism, that things just came out gradually. And then you get people, naturalists, that come up with what's called, or sarcastically called, the hopeful monster theory, that a bird, a dinosaur laid an egg, and out of the egg popped a bird, a fully formed bird. Okay, that's not science. We would call that magic, right? And they offer no sufficient explanation of that. And Dubinsky focuses on specified complexity and quantifies improbability, concluding that design must happen, right? And that the Big Bang singularity and entropy arrow imply a non-natural causality. I don't think they do. I think they absolutely show you that you need something. Actually, I misread my own words. It does support a non-natural thing. So a supernatural explanation. So the strength of this argument is that abiogenesis odds or cosmic tuning overwhelm naturalism. As Wilder Smith notes, entropy favors disorder, not life. Intelligent design provides testable critiques, right? Like Behe systems exposing evolution's limits. It all aligns with the Bible's inspiration by implying a resolution to difficulties via divine agency. That God is the ultimate cause. God is the uncaused cause of all other things. Now, the claimed weaknesses, naturalistic models like RNA world experiments show self-replicating molecules. Multiverse might explain cosmic origins without design, if multiverse is right, but again, it's a thought experiment. Irreducible complexity is rebutted by co-optation. Okay? Now this is the idea here is that the flagellum had a precursor that wasn't as complicated, and that it was co-opted for the flagellum. There's zero evidence of that. No scientific evidence for that at all. So these weaknesses are speculation. And Dubinsky's math, they claim, is flawed, and equivocal probabilities, ignoring pathways. So they claim. They think it's a weakness. And, even if I accept that weakness in Dubinsky's argument, and if I threw it out completely, the argument's still there. The abiogenesis gaps may close with research, they say, but they have never closed any of them. And to close them, they actually have to disprove scientific laws. Not theories, not hypotheses, laws. Okay? And naturalism success in other fields like causal closure suggest origins will follow. I think this is a conclusion that doesn't follow the evidence. It's a non sequitur. So what's the relative value? And I put this again, these are some of my strongest arguments for God, and they come from science. And I think it's up about 75% leans to God, that you need an intelligent designer. You need this. You can't get the cosmos. You can't get the first life. That little microscopic life that supposedly developed in a primordial pool, that little thing that you were taught in biology class. You can't get that. You can't even get proteins. Never mind the complexity of a cell or a multi-cell animal using any known scientific natural process. So in part one, I looked at 4 philosophical arguments that were, I ranked them between 52 and 65% convincing. And they only dealt with Proposition X, that the God of the Bible exists. And then I ended with Blaise Pascal, because I think his thing is right. His gambler analogy. If I have 2 choices, I can gamble that God exists. And if I'm wrong, I lose everything. Or I can gamble that God does, if I gamble that God exists, and I live my life like God exists, and that I have an eternal life, and I live that way, and I'm wrong, I lose nothing. I absolutely lose nothing in my life. But if I take the gamble that God doesn't exist, and live like God doesn't exist, and pretend, and I'm wrong, I lose everything. I face eternal judgment. Eternal torment in hell is a possibility, right? Or annihilationism. You don't know what however you view the end. You have that. There is nobody, no gambler I know, that would ever place a bet that says, okay, you got 2 bets you can place. On one bet, if that goes against you and you lose nothing. But if you win everything. And the other bet, if you win nothing. And if you lose everything. Who in their right mind would place the other bet? And that's Blaise Pascal. And in part 2 here, I looked at 4 scientific arguments. One was even at 50%. I was really knocked it down, trying to be super conservative. And the other 3 arguments I found very strong, and I was at 70, 65, and 65%. Like I said, you may find them 55%. You may find them 80%. Wherever you go, put your own numbers down. But I started looking at these, and then I did a deep dive when I started running into naturalistic explanations for the origin of life, abiogenesis, and how science runs against it. And I would say since then, I might even be higher than 65% on that argument, right? And I give you the link here to that study. You can listen to it. And then part 3, I'm going to look at the evidence for the resurrection. Because like I said, if Jesus got out of the tomb, that's kind of hard to explain without God, right? But if God not only predicted Jesus coming to life and being our Savior and dying on the cross and raising from the dead, but God caused it to happen, and Jesus did get out of the tomb, it is strong arguments for our proposition Y that Jesus did get out of the tomb. And that would in turn be a very strong argument for, the God existing. So normally at this point, I would put on music, and I would go read the chat and then try to answer any questions. I'm set up on a partial setup. It's my first day back stream, and I don't have everything working. So I can't look at the chat today. So forgive me for that. I'm just going to close this and get out of here. Hopefully I'll see you Friday morning with Neil, and then again on my iStream at 9, 9 my time, whatever. It's not necessarily 9 your time. But I stream 3 days a week. As Donahue pop on most places, and I understand D Live's finally shutting down, but you got Rumble, X, different places where I was Donahue Papa, and then I'm also come in as what do you call it? Unpilled. I messed up Donahue Papa, so I'm Bill Donahue. And when I finally went to YouTube, I couldn't get Donahue Papa or Bill Donahue or Discerning Truths. And after 10 attempts, they finally made me Discerning Truths 534. Not easy to find, but if you find it and like it, my replays are all up there. And I suggest you would check them out. But I'm going to close this down and get out of here for today. And God willing, I will see you then on Friday. And thanks for visiting me, right?